She was not someone people would notice immediately in a crowd. She walked through life quietly, like a gentle breeze that brushed past unnoticed. Yet she carried a presence that was calm and steady. Her name was Mira, and she lived in a small town where everyone knew each other's names, habits, and stories. Life there moved slowly, and people often thought they understood everything about everyone. Mira, however, was someone who couldn't be easily summed up. She had a soft smile, eyes that reflected curiosity and warmth, and a heart full of small kindnesses that she offered quietly to the world. Mira's life was simple. She worked in a modest little shop that sold everyday items. Groceries, small trinkets, and sometimes things people didn't even know they needed until they saw them there. Every day, she would wake up before the sun, brew herself a cup of tea, and step out into the waking town with a gentle determination. She didn't crave attention or recognition. The world, as far as she was concerned, was already noisy enough. She simply wanted to live with honesty and kindness, helping where she could and keeping to herself otherwise. But Mira had one small secret that she carried with pride, though it was invisible at first glance. On her wrist she had a tiny tattoo. It was simple, almost delicate, a small symbol that meant a great deal to her. To outsiders, it might have looked like nothing more than a little ink, but to Mira, it was a story, a memory, and a reminder all rolled into one. She had gotten it many years ago, during a moment of personal triumph, a time when she had overcome her fears and made a choice to step forward into her own life. The tattoo was not flashy, not designed to impress anyone, and certainly not something she wore to show off. It was hers, and it carried a meaning that only she fully understood. Even though Mira was gentle and unassuming, she was strong in her own quiet way. Life had taught her that appearances could be deceiving and that real strength often came from within. She had faced challenges, small and big, that had tested her patience and her courage. Sometimes, she had been laughed at for her choices, her quiet nature, or her small ways of standing out. But she never let that laughter define her. She knew who she was, and she knew what mattered. Her tattoo was part of that. A small, constant reminder that courage wasn't loud or flashy. It was something that lived quietly inside a person, waiting to show itself when the time came. On that particular morning, Mira woke up earlier than usual. The town was just beginning to stir. Birds sang from the trees lining the streets, and the first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the rooftops. She prepared herself as usual, slipping on her modest clothes and tying her hair neatly. But today, she felt a little excitement mixed with her usual calm. She wasn't sure why exactly. Perhaps it was the way the morning light fell on her small garden. Or maybe it was just the sense of possibility that always lingered in the air at the start of a new day. Whatever it was, she felt ready to face the world, in her own quiet way. As she walked down the familiar streets toward the marketplace, people greeted her with nods and smiles. Mira returned their greetings softly, letting the warmth of her presence touch them without needing to say much. Children waved at her from doorways, and old neighbors called out questions about the weather or the crops. She loved this town. Its simplicity, its honesty, and even its occasional small gossip that seemed harmless in the grand scheme of things. Mira believed in seeing the good in people, even when they didn't always notice or appreciate it. Her tattoo peeked out from beneath the sleeve of her light sweater as she moved, catching the sun for a brief moment. Most people wouldn't have given it a second glance. Some might not have even noticed it at all. But for Mira, it felt like a tiny shield, a quiet emblem of who she was. She had chosen that design carefully, spending months thinking about what it should mean, how it should look, and where it should be placed. It was meant to be personal, intimate, and private. Yet here it was, glimpsed by the world every time she moved. That thought made her smile softly, a little secret shared silently with the morning light. Mira was unaware that today would be different. She didn't know that the small, simple tattoo on her wrist would draw attention. Not just curious glances, but laughter, whispers, and disbelief from people who could not understand its significance. She couldn't know that someone with authority, someone unexpected, would soon notice it and see in it something extraordinary. For now, though, she walked with her head held just slightly higher than usual, feeling a mixture of serenity and quiet pride. In this ordinary small town, life often seemed predictable, safe, and routine. Yet the small details, a gentle smile, a kind gesture, a tiny tattoo, could ripple out in ways that nobody expected. Mira, unaware of the day's events yet to unfold, carried with her the power of something deeply personal. It was small, yes, but in its simplicity, it held strength, courage, and a story that was waiting to be recognized. And sometimes that is all it takes to change the way the world sees someone. Mira moved through the town square that morning, the streets alive with the soft hum of daily life. Vendors were setting up their stalls, arranging colorful fruits and fresh bread, while the smell of baked goods mixed with the earthy scent of morning dew. Children ran past her, their laughter ringing like tiny bells, chasing after each other with boundless energy. The sun had climbed a little higher, casting a warm glow over everything, and the small town seemed to be waking slowly but surely, like a giant stretching its limbs. Mira walked calmly among it all, her steps light, her hands folded gently in front of her. She loved this time of day, when the world felt both familiar and full of possibilities. The townspeople, though sometimes noisy and opinionated, had a rhythm that she understood. She greeted each person she passed with a soft smile, receiving nods and occasional waves in return. Even those who barely knew her seemed to sense her quiet warmth, the way she carried herself with a mix of humility and quiet strength. But she also knew that not everyone would understand someone like her. Some people, she had learned over the years, liked to point out what they considered unusual, small, or out of place, even if it was harmless. As she wandered closer to the marketplace, Mira felt a few curious glances. She didn't mind. She had long grown used to people noticing the small details of her life. Today, however, the looks seemed sharper, tinged with something she didn't quite recognize. She brushed it off and continued walking, focusing on the rows of stalls and the cheerful chatter of merchants calling out their goods. But she could feel it, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way whispers started to rise around her, just low enough that she couldn't catch every word, yet loud enough that it prickled at her awareness. Then she noticed them. A small group of townspeople standing near a fruit stall were staring directly at her. Their eyes weren't curious. They were amused. Their smiles weren't friendly. They were mocking, and their attention wasn't on her face or her gentle demeanor. It was on her wrist, where her tiny tattoo peeked out from under the sleeve of her sweater. She had always considered it a private emblem, personal and meaningful only to her. It was simple, delicate, and almost unnoticeable to someone not paying attention. But now, she could feel their judgment, their laughter hidden behind polite gestures and half-whispered comments. She tried to ignore it at first. Mira had learned that the best way to handle small-mindedness was often to simply move on, to let their words float past her like leaves on a river. She continued walking, hoping that their attention would drift away. But the whispers grew louder. One of them laughed softly, a sound that was meant to sting, and another leaned closer to her friend, pointing discreetly at her wrist. Mira's stomach tightened. She had never sought attention, and she had certainly never wanted to be ridiculed for something so personal. But now, the simple, small tattoo that had always been her quiet pride was the center of unwanted focus. The crowd's reaction wasn't immediate hostility. It was subtle, the kind that makes someone doubt themselves before they even realize what's happening. "Why would someone get something so silly?" one voice whispered. "It looks childish," another muttered. Mira felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and frustration rising within her. She wanted to pull her sleeve down, hide the tattoo, disappear into the crowd. Yet something inside her told her not to. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and continued walking as if nothing had happened. The quiet courage she had carried all her life was starting to surface now, the kind that doesn't need applause or recognition to exist. As she walked, Mira began to notice more people turning to watch her. Some were curious, some amused, and some openly judgmental. A group of merchants paused their work to glance her way, their smiles laced with disbelief. Even a few children, sensing the change in adult behavior, slowed down and stared with innocent curiosity. Mira's heart beat faster, But she didn't run. She didn't hide. Her tiny tattoo, which had always been a personal statement of courage, was now a symbol in the eyes of others, though not the one she had intended. Despite the growing attention, Mira reminded herself of why she had gotten the tattoo in the first place. It wasn't for anyone else to see or approve. It was for her, a reminder of strength, hope, and the courage to live authentically. She thought about the day she had chosen to get it, how nervous she had felt in the studio, how the small mark on her skin had made her feel a quiet power deep within. That feeling was still there, stronger now because the world had begun to notice it, even if they didn't understand. She realized that their laughter and whispers couldn't diminish the meaning it held for her. At that moment, something shifted in Mira's awareness. She stopped worrying about what they thought. She decided to walk with pride, letting her tattoo be seen exactly as it was, small, simple, yet powerful in its own right. Her steps grew steadier, her posture taller, and a quiet confidence radiated from her. The small crowd that had been mocking her paused, sensing something different about the way she carried herself. Mira wasn't just a quiet woman with a tiny tattoo anymore. She was someone who knew her worth, someone who could face judgment without fear. Little did Mira know, her quiet strength and the small tattoo on her wrist were about to attract the attention of someone whose presence would completely change the course of that day. Someone whose understanding and recognition would turn ridicule into respect, and laughter into awe. But for now, she continued through the marketplace, calm yet aware, carrying herself with a grace that only comes from knowing who you truly are, even when the world doesn't understand. Mira continued walking through the marketplace, feeling the weight of curious eyes on her tiny tattoo. She tried to focus on the stalls in front of her, on the bright colors of fresh vegetables, the glimmering jars of honey, and the neatly arranged loaves of bread. But it was impossible to ignore the whispers and the occasional stifled laughter that seemed to follow her like a shadow. The small group of townspeople who had first noticed her tattoo had begun to gather more attention. Others, drawn by the sound of soft chuckles and pointed fingers, turned their heads, curious to see what had caused the commotion. The whispers grew bolder. "Why would anyone put that on themselves?" one woman muttered, glancing at her friend as though they were sharing a secret joke. Another person leaned in, smirking, and said, "It looks silly, doesn't it?" The laughter wasn't loud at first, but it spread like wildfire. Mira could hear it, feel it, and yet she kept moving. Each laugh and whispered comment felt like tiny needles pressing against her confidence. She felt a flash of anger, a fleeting thought of hiding her tattoo or slipping out of the crowd unnoticed. But she pushed it away. Mira's small tattoo wasn't just ink on skin. It was a symbol of her courage, a reminder of the moments when she had faced challenges and made brave choices in her life. She had never meant for it to be judged by anyone else. Yet, here it was, under the scrutinizing eyes of strangers who didn't understand its meaning. Despite the mocking, she reminded herself that their opinion could not take away the story she carried on her wrist. The group who mocked her wasn't just a few people. It had grown quietly as people were drawn to the spectacle. Some were curious, some amused, and some judgmental. A man standing near a fruit stall chuckled and nudged his companion. "Look at that tiny thing. Why bother?" he said, pointing subtly to her wrist. Another voice joined in. "It's so small. It doesn't even mean anything," a woman whispered, shaking her head. Mira felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. Despite the discomfort, Mira held her head high. She straightened her back and walked with careful steps, each one a quiet act of resistance. The laughter and whispers were attempts to diminish her, but they only highlighted her strength. Mira knew that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and invisible to those who couldn't see beyond the surface. She decided not to let their words dictate her self-worth. As she moved further into the marketplace, she noticed that even children had begun to stare. Their innocent eyes were wide, some curious, some puzzled, and some imitating the adults' reactions. A small boy tugged at his mother's hand and whispered something, clearly trying to understand what made this woman the focus of attention. Mira smiled faintly at the children, realizing that they hadn't yet learned the harshness of judgment. Their curiosity was pure, unlike the laughter of the adults, which was edged with ridicule. The tension around her tattoo reached its peak when someone made a louder comment, thinking it would embarrass her further. "Why would anyone mark themselves like that?" the man said, louder this time, chuckling as if he had delivered a clever joke. A few others joined in, nodding and laughing along. Mira felt a momentary sting. Her private symbol, something so deeply personal, was now being dissected by strangers who had no understanding of its significance. She felt a pang of vulnerability but also a surge of quiet determination. Instead of retreating, Mira made a choice. She decided to embrace the moment, to walk with the knowledge that her tattoo was meaningful, even if no one else could see it that way. She lifted her chin slightly higher and allowed her wrist, with the tiny inked mark, to show. Each step she took became an act of courage, a subtle defiance against the ignorance around her. It was as though she was telling the crowd without words, "This is who I am, and my story is mine." People began to notice the shift in her demeanor. The laughter faltered slightly, replaced by surprise and curiosity. Mira wasn't embarrassed or hiding. She was standing tall, unafraid, and that startled the onlookers. The small tattoo, which had been the reason for mockery moments ago, now became a symbol of quiet strength. The group that had mocked her exchanged confused glances, unsure how to react to her composure. It was in this moment, surrounded by whispers and growing attention, that Mira's inner courage fully revealed itself. The marketplace, once a place of casual chatter and laughter, now held a different energy. She was no longer just a quiet woman passing through. She had become a figure of resilience, someone who refused to let the opinions of others define her. The tiny tattoo on her wrist, though still small and delicate, radiated meaning far beyond its size, carrying a story of bravery and self-respect. Little did Mira know, someone very important had noticed her. Someone whose authority and presence would soon change the tone of the crowd entirely. This person, who commanded respect and carried a reputation that silenced rooms, was walking toward her. And in moments, the whispers and laughter that had surrounded her would meet a force even stronger than her quiet courage. A recognition that would turn mockery into admiration and curiosity into respect. But for now, Mira continued through the marketplace, each step steady and unwavering, holding her head high, letting her tiny tattoo shine as a symbol of her personal strength and the courage that lived quietly within her. The marketplace was buzzing as usual, but something different was beginning to happen. Mira's calm courage and the small tattoo on her wrist had drawn attention, and among the onlookers, someone very important had noticed. He was a general, a man whose presence demanded respect, whose reputation carried authority, and whose actions often silenced rooms without a single word. He was visiting the town on official business, walking through the square to meet with local leaders and observe the daily life of the people. His uniform was crisp and immaculate, his posture perfect, and there was a quiet power in the way he moved. As he walked, his sharp eyes scanned the marketplace, taking in the bustling activity. He noticed the curious crowd that had gathered around Mira, and something in their expressions caught his attention. They weren't looking at her for ordinary reasons. Their eyes were filled with amusement, judgment, and whispered mockery. The general's gaze followed theirs, and when it settled on Mira, he noticed the tiny tattoo on her wrist. It was small and unassuming, yet it had drawn an unusual amount of attention. The general was not the type to ignore what he observed. Years of experience had taught him to read people, to notice courage, and to understand the quiet strength in those who didn't shout or demand recognition. He could tell instantly that Mira was different. There was a calm dignity in her stance, a quiet pride in the way she held herself, and a resilience that seemed to radiate from her very being. She was unassuming, yes, but there was an undeniable strength about her, the kind of strength that couldn't be mocked or diminished no matter how hard people tried. As he approached, the murmurs and whispers around Mira seemed to fade slightly, as though the presence of someone so commanding naturally demanded attention. The crowd sensed him before they even realized it. They straightened a little, unsure how to react to this unexpected figure entering their midst. Some of the mocking voices faltered, quieting down as they instinctively understood that ridicule would not sit well in the presence of authority. Yet Mira continued walking, unbothered by the general's arrival, unaware of who was approaching. Her courage was natural, not performative, and that made it even more noticeable. The general moved closer, his eyes still fixed on Mira. He observed the tattoo on her wrist with interest. It was small, almost delicate, yet there was something in it that spoke of personal meaning and quiet bravery. Unlike others who saw it as a reason to laugh, he could sense the story behind it, the courage it represented, the personal significance it held, and the quiet confidence it must have taken for her to carry it openly in a world that often mocked differences. He had seen many symbols of bravery in his life, some earned in battle, some earned in the quiet moments of personal struggle. Mira's tattoo, though tiny and seemingly insignificant to most, fit into that latter category perfectly. He stepped forward with measured grace, his boots clicking lightly against the cobblestones. The crowd instinctively parted a little, creating a clear path as if unconsciously making way for someone important. Mira noticed the change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift in the energy around her. People were no longer whispering and laughing quite as freely. Their focus had moved, curiosity replacing mockery. She still didn't know who the man approaching her was, but she sensed authority in his presence. The general reached her side and paused, allowing the moment to settle. He looked at her calmly, his gaze steady but not intimidating. There was no immediate comment, no sudden declaration, just observation and quiet acknowledgement. The marketplace seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Mira's heart beat a little faster, but she remained composed, aware of her own courage and unwilling to let anyone else's judgment control her. He then spoke softly, but in a voice that carried naturally over the low murmur of the crowd. "That is a small tattoo you have," he said, nodding toward her wrist. His tone wasn't mocking, curious, or judgmental. It was simply a statement, paired with a respect that immediately changed the dynamic of the scene. The crowd, sensing the shift, fell silent. Mira looked up at him, meeting his gaze. For the first time that day, she felt seen not for ridicule, but for who she was and what she carried within her. There was a pause, a quiet moment where the weight of the marketplace, the murmurs, and the mockery seemed to vanish. The general's presence alone commanded respect, but the way he focused on her, acknowledging the tattoo without judgment, added a new layer of validation to her courage. Mira realized that the attention she had feared could turn into recognition, and that strength, when quietly observed by the right person, could shine brighter than ridicule ever could. The general's eyes held something that others in the crowd could not understand at first: recognition. Not just of the tattoo itself, but of the quiet bravery behind it. He saw her composure, her courage, and her strength, all of which could not be measured by the size of the ink on her wrist. He had encountered many forms of bravery in his life, but there was something pure and striking about the kind Mira displayed: courage without pretense, dignity without demand, and pride without arrogance. As he remained near her, the crowd began to realize that their laughter and judgment were misplaced. Mira was no longer just a simple woman in the marketplace. She had caught the attention of someone powerful, someone who could recognize her inner strength immediately. The whispers died down, and an air of anticipation grew. People began to look at her differently, realizing that there was more to this quiet woman than they had ever imagined. And in that moment, Mira's journey of quiet courage was about to reach a turning point. One that would show her, and everyone around, that true strength is not measured by size, appearance, or approval from others, but by the courage to stand tall even when the world tries to laugh at you. The crowd around Mira had already started to quiet down when the general stepped closer. His presence alone had a weight that silenced whispers and softened the judgmental glances. But what happened next would completely change the mood of the marketplace. The general, calm and composed, looked directly at Mira's wrist, where the tiny tattoo rested. For a moment there was a pause, a stillness that seemed to stretch across the square. Everyone could sense that something important was about to happen. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost casual, the general slowly rolled up the sleeve of his uniform. The movement was deliberate, measured, and commanding, yet carried no arrogance. As the fabric slid up, it revealed a tattoo on his forearm. Unlike Mira's delicate, subtle mark, his was larger, bolder, and unmistakably meaningful. It was a symbol of service, of courage, and of a life lived with honor and sacrifice. The crowd gasped. People who had moments ago been mocking Mira now stared in shock, unable to hide their surprise. Those tiny whispers of ridicule were replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. The contrast was stark. The quiet woman had been judged for a small tattoo, but here was a man of great authority, someone respected by all, with a mark that mirrored her courage in its own way. The realization hit slowly. The symbol that had caused laughter was not trivial at all. It was a mark of pride, strength, and personal meaning, and it had been recognized by someone the entire town respected. Mira froze for a moment, taken aback herself. She had not expected this at all. The general had seen her courage and her tattoo without judgment, but to reveal his own, something so personal and significant, was beyond anything she could have imagined. His gesture was quiet, yet it spoke volumes. It was a silent acknowledgement that what she carried on her wrist was not silly or meaningless. It was brave, important, and worthy of respect. The people around them began to shift. Some stepped back, unsure how to react. Others murmured to each other, trying to process what they had just seen. Those who had laughed at Mira's tattoo now avoided her eyes, feeling a sudden sense of shame for their behavior. Their laughter had been replaced by respect, tinged with awe. Mira could feel the energy of the crowd change. The marketplace, once filled with ridicule and whispers, was now alive with a quiet admiration that was impossible to ignore. The general did not say anything immediately. He didn't need to. The tattoo on his arm was a statement in itself, a symbol that connected him in a way to Mira. It told a story of courage, of experience, of battles fought, whether in service, personal struggles, or moments of moral strength. The people around them could sense the significance, even if they didn't know the full story behind it. And in that moment, Mira realized that her tattoo, small as it was, shared the same essence. It was a mark of bravery, a symbol of standing strong despite the judgment of others. Mira felt a surge of emotion. She had always carried her tattoo privately, a quiet emblem of her courage and her life's small victories. To have it recognized even indirectly by the general, a man who embodied strength, authority, and respect, was overwhelming. For the first time, she felt that her courage was visible not just to herself but to the world. It wasn't about proving anything to the crowd. It was about a silent acknowledgement that true bravery, no matter how small, could be seen and understood by those who truly recognized it. The crowd around them continued to watch in awe. The whispers that had mocked her were gone, replaced by a quiet respect that spread from one person to another. Children looked on with wide eyes, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Adults exchanged glances, realizing that their assumptions and judgments had been completely wrong. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Mira was no longer a subject of ridicule. She had become someone worthy of admiration. Then the general spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. He didn't mock the crowd or praise Mira in a loud, exaggerated way. Instead, he simply acknowledged her courage, sharing a few words about the significance of personal symbols, small acts of bravery, and the meaning behind tattoos that hold deep personal stories. His tone was respectful, almost reverent, and it amplified the impact of his gesture. The crowd listened, captivated by both his words and the simple truth they carried. Mira's heart swelled. She realized that the moment had changed everything. The mocking laughter, the judgmental stares, the whispers of ridicule, all of it had been replaced by a recognition that transcended size, age, and social standing. The general's tattoo had shown her, and the people around them, that courage could exist in many forms. Her tiny tattoo, once considered silly, now had a resonance and significance that no one could deny. In that marketplace, under the soft morning sun, A quiet woman and a powerful general shared an unspoken connection through their tattoos. It was a moment that would be remembered not for mockery, but for respect, understanding, and the power of quiet courage. Mira had faced the judgment of others, stood tall despite it, and found that true recognition often comes from unexpected places, and in ways that words alone cannot describe. After the general revealed his tattoo, a hush fell over the marketplace. The laughter that had once echoed around Mira's small, delicate tattoo vanished completely, replaced by an awe-filled silence. People who had been mocking her just moments ago were now staring, their expressions shifting from amusement to amazement. The change in energy was palpable. Something extraordinary was happening right in the middle of the town square. Mira herself could hardly believe it. The general's quiet, commanding gesture had turned her world upside down in the most unexpected way. The general looked at her wrist again, his eyes steady and calm, but full of understanding. He could see the courage in her small tattoo, the story it carried, the battles she had faced quietly, and the bravery she displayed simply by wearing it openly in the face of ridicule. There was no judgment in his gaze, no mocking tone, only recognition. He understood what most people in the crowd could not. Courage is not measured by size, appearance, or social status, but by the strength of the heart and the resilience to stand firm even when others laugh. He spoke next, his voice carrying over the marketplace with a quiet authority that made everyone listen. Bravery is not always loud, he said. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is small, almost invisible to the eyes of those who are too quick to judge. But that does not make it any less important. The words landed gently, like a ripple spreading across the crowd, reaching even those who had been the harshest in their judgment. Mira felt a lump in her throat as she realized that her courage, once invisible, was being acknowledged by someone she had never met, a person whose opinion carried weight far beyond the marketplace. The general went on to explain the story behind his tattoo, a symbol of his years of service, his personal struggles, and the lessons he had learned in life. He spoke not to boast or to intimidate, but to highlight a simple truth, that every mark on one's body, every symbol we carry, can represent something deeply meaningful, something that defines who we are beyond what others see. Mira listened intently, feeling a sense of connection that was both surprising and comforting. Here was a man, respected by everyone, who saw her courage as real, valid, and worthy of respect. The crowd was captivated. Adults who had once snickered or whispered were now silent, absorbing the general's words and the weight of the moment. They began to realize that their laughter had been misplaced, that the woman they had mocked was in fact someone remarkable. Even children, wide-eyed and curious, sensed the shift. They looked at Mira differently now, recognizing that there was bravery in standing firm, in being oneself, and in carrying personal meaning with quiet pride. Mira herself felt a surge of pride and relief. For so long, she had carried her tattoo as a private symbol, a reminder of personal strength and courage. She had never sought approval, but being recognized by the general made her feel seen in a profound way. It was not about fame or attention. It was about acknowledgement, the understanding that her small acts of courage mattered, and that her story, though quiet, had resonance. Her tiny tattoo, which had been ridiculed just moments before, had become a symbol of dignity and inner strength in the eyes of everyone present. The general smiled softly at her, a gesture of encouragement and respect. "You wear your story well," he said simply. The words were quiet, yet they carried immense weight. Mira felt her heart swell with gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the validation of all the quiet courage she had cultivated over the years. It was a moment of transformation. The ridicule had been replaced with respect, the whispers replaced with acknowledgement, and the doubt replaced with pride. The townspeople, inspired by the scene, began to whisper among themselves, but now the words were filled with admiration. "She is brave," one person said quietly. "I never realized how strong she is," another admitted. The laughter was gone, replaced by reflection and respect. People started to see Mira not as a simple, quiet woman, but as someone whose courage could not be ignored. Her small tattoo had become a focal point for something far greater. The realization that true strength is often unseen, personal, and quiet, yet undeniable when recognized. Mira's shoulders relaxed, and she allowed herself to smile genuinely for the first time that morning. The fear and discomfort she had felt earlier dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of belonging and acceptance. She realized that standing firm in her identity, even when faced with mockery, had brought her to this moment of recognition. The general had not only honored her courage, but had shown everyone that respect for bravery comes from understanding, not judgment. The marketplace seemed brighter, lighter, as if the energy of the day had shifted. Mira walked a little taller, her wrist exposed with pride, knowing that her story had been seen and appreciated. The general's acknowledgement had created a ripple effect, changing the way the crowd viewed her and, perhaps, inspiring others to carry their own quiet courage more openly. In that moment, Mira understood a truth she had always known in her heart, but had rarely seen reflected in the world around her. Courage is not loud, it is not always visible, and it does not require the approval of others to exist. Yet when it is recognized, even in the smallest of gestures, it can transform not only the person who carries it but also everyone who witnesses it. The marketplace, once a place of mockery, had become a place of respect, understanding, and quiet admiration. All because one simple tattoo had been seen through the eyes of someone who understood its meaning. The moment had changed everything. What had begun as a simple marketplace encounter, filled with whispers and laughter at Mira's tiny tattoo, had transformed into something entirely different. The people who had once mocked her now looked on with awe and quiet respect. Their expressions, which had been filled with judgment, were softened by realization. They saw her not as someone small or insignificant, but as a person of quiet strength, courage, and dignity. Mira walked through the marketplace with a sense of calm pride she had never felt before. The tattoo on her wrist, which had caused ridicule only moments ago, now carried a new weight. The acknowledgement of the general, a man whose respect was recognized by everyone in the town, had elevated its meaning. Her small symbol of personal courage had become something far larger in the eyes of those around her. It wasn't just ink on her skin anymore. It was a mark of bravery that could not be ignored. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to react differently. Some of the townspeople whispered to each other, exchanging glances filled with surprise and newfound admiration. "I can't believe I laughed at her," one woman admitted quietly to her companion. "She's so brave," said a man, shaking his head in disbelief. Children, who had been curious from the beginning, now looked at Mira with wonder. Even the merchants paused their work to glance at her, seeing her in a completely new light. The mockery that had once surrounded her had vanished, replaced by respect and even inspiration. Mira herself was still processing what had happened. She had never sought attention for her tattoo. She had carried it as a private symbol, a reminder of her courage and the moments in her life when she had overcome fear. But now, she realized that her quiet strength had made an impact on others, not because she had demanded it, but because she had simply been herself. The general's acknowledgement had shown the townspeople that there is value in courage, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant it appears. The general, standing nearby, watched Mira with a calm and approving expression. He had seen the fear she had felt when the laughter started, and he had seen the courage she displayed when she chose to stand tall. By revealing his own tattoo, he had made a silent statement. Bravery is universal, it comes in many forms, and it is worthy of respect wherever it appears. His presence had shifted the perception of the crowd entirely, turning ridicule into admiration and skepticism into recognition. People began to speak more openly, but now their words were filled with respect. Some approached Mira to apologize for laughing or for being judgmental. "I didn't understand before," one woman said softly. "Your tattoo, it's remarkable." A man nodded in agreement. "I should have never mocked something so personal. You are courageous." Mira listened politely, offering gentle smiles and quiet words of acknowledgement. She did not need to boast or explain her tattoo. Her courage had spoken for itself, and the recognition she received was genuine and heartfelt. As the crowd shifted, the atmosphere of the marketplace completely transformed. What had started as judgment and ridicule became a moment of collective reflection. People realized that courage often comes in quiet, subtle forms, in small gestures, personal choices, and symbols that carry deep meaning. Mira's tattoo had become a focal point for this realization. It reminded everyone present that bravery does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and its impact is felt deeply when seen through the eyes of someone who truly understands. The ripple effect of the moment continued to grow. Those who had initially mocked her began to reconsider how they treated others, realizing that their judgment had been hasty and unfair. Children, inspired by Mira's calm courage, began to see strength as something internal rather than something loud or obvious. Even adults, who had once been quick to laugh or criticize, seemed to carry a newfound understanding that respect and recognition are earned through integrity, courage, and the quiet dignity of simply being oneself. Mira walked slowly through the square, allowing herself to take in the change around her. Each step felt lighter, freer, as if a weight she had carried, the fear of judgment, had been lifted. She could see the respect in the eyes of the crowd, the admiration, and even the curiosity of those who now wanted to understand her story. Her small tattoo, once a private emblem, had become a symbol of personal strength for everyone to see. It was a reminder that courage can inspire, even when it is quiet, and that recognition often comes from those who truly understand its meaning. The general finally stepped forward, speaking directly to Mira and the crowd. His words were measured, calm, but carried the weight of authority and wisdom. "Bravery is not measured by size or by what others think of it," he said. "It is measured by the courage to stand firm, to live authentically, and to honor the choices we make, no matter how small they may seem." The crowd listened intently, absorbing the truth in his words. Mira felt her heart swell with gratitude, not only for the recognition she had received but also for the lesson being shared with everyone present. That true courage is worth seeing, acknowledging, and respecting. By the time Mira left the marketplace that day, the town had changed in subtle but significant ways. The people who had once laughed were now thoughtful and reflective. The children carried a new understanding of bravery, and Mira herself walked taller, proud of the courage she had shown and the impact it had created. What had started as a moment of ridicule had become a lesson in respect, courage, and the power of standing firm in one's truth. The day ended not with shame or embarrassment, but with admiration, acknowledgement, and a quiet celebration of bravery, both hers and the general's. Mira had shown that true strength does not demand attention. It earns it through integrity, courage, and the willingness to remain steadfast, even when the world laughs. By now, the marketplace had completely transformed. What had begun as a simple morning walk for Mira, filled with whispers and laughter at her tiny tattoo, had become an unforgettable moment of recognition and respect. The people who had once mocked her now looked at her with admiration. The children who had stared with curiosity now watched in awe. And through it all, the general stood quietly nearby, his calm presence reminding everyone that true courage is seen by those who recognize its value, not by those who laugh first and think later. Mira felt a deep sense of calm and pride. She had carried her tattoo for many years, a small mark that represented her personal courage, resilience, and the choices she had made to stay true to herself. It had always been private, something that only she truly understood. She had never sought attention or validation for it. But now, she realized that her courage, even in its quietest form, could inspire others. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being authentic and steadfast in who she was. The recognition from the general had elevated her private symbol into something far larger, and the effect on the people around her was profound. The general, still standing beside her, gave a small nod of acknowledgement. His gaze met hers, and in that silent exchange, Mira felt a deep sense of understanding. He didn't need to say much. The gesture alone communicated volumes. He had seen her courage, recognized it, and honored it, not with grand words or public applause, but with quiet respect. That respect was far more powerful than any loud praise, because it came from someone who understood what true bravery meant. The townspeople began to whisper among themselves, sharing their reflections. "She stood so calmly," one woman said, shaking her head in wonder. "I was so wrong to laugh at her," admitted a man. Some approached Mira hesitantly, offering apologies or kind words, their voices filled with sincerity. "Your tattoo. It's more than just a mark," one person said softly. "It shows strength, courage, and pride." Mira smiled gently, accepting their words with quiet dignity. She didn't need to explain her tattoo or defend her choices. Her courage had spoken for itself, and it had been seen in a way that mattered most. The general then spoke briefly to the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of experience and authority. "True courage," he said, "is not measured by size or by appearances. It is measured by the strength to stand firm in the face of judgment, by the integrity to honor oneself, and by the humility to let actions speak louder than words." His words resonated deeply with everyone present. The marketplace, once filled with ridicule and mockery, had become a place of reflection and inspiration. People began to understand that bravery could be quiet, subtle, and even small in form, yet still powerful in impact. Mira's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and pride. She realized that this day, which had started like any other, would be remembered by the town for years to come. Her small tattoo, which had been the cause of so much laughter and judgment, had become a symbol of courage and dignity. And it had not only transformed the way others saw her, but it had also reminded her of the quiet strength she had always carried within herself. As she walked through the marketplace, she noticed the change in the people around her. The children who had been curious were now inspired, looking at her with wide eyes as if they were seeing a hero. Adults who had once whispered and laughed were now thoughtful, some nodding in silent acknowledgement of the lesson they had learned. Even the vendors paused in their work, giving her respectful nods. Mira felt a sense of peace settle over her, knowing that she had faced ridicule and come through with integrity intact. The general, understanding the significance of the moment, offered a few more words to Mira. "You have shown bravery in its purest form," he said. "It is not about how loud you are or how big the mark is that you leave behind. It is about standing tall, being true to yourself, and letting your courage shine quietly. That is a lesson everyone here can learn from today." Mira felt a deep sense of honor. His acknowledgement was not about status or position. It was about understanding, respect, and recognizing the value of quiet strength. By the end of the day, the marketplace had returned to its normal rhythm, but something intangible had changed. Mira had walked in as a quiet woman with a small tattoo, uncertain how the world would respond. She left as someone who had been seen for her courage, respected for her resilience, and celebrated for her quiet strength. The lesson of her small tattoo had rippled outward, touching everyone who witnessed the scene, reminding them that true bravery does not require recognition, but when it is acknowledged, it has the power to inspire and transform. As Mira left the marketplace, walking toward her home, she felt lighter, freer, and more confident than ever before. She knew that the judgment of others could no longer shake her, because she had faced it and stood tall. The tiny tattoo on her wrist, which had always been her private symbol of courage, had now become a beacon, a reminder that strength comes from within, and that those who truly recognize it can see beyond appearances to the heart of who a person is. In the quiet aftermath of that extraordinary morning, Mira realized a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. Bravery is not about being seen by everyone, but about standing firm in your truth. And sometimes, it takes only one person who understands to transform ridicule into respect, judgment into admiration, and a simple moment into a memory that lasts forever. The marketplace would remember her. The townspeople would remember her. And Mira would remember the day she walked with her tiny tattoo, faced mockery, and left with the recognition of her courage. A recognition that came not from everyone, but from the right person, and in doing so, changed everything.